Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. You may have seen I've been doing a bit of freezer meal prep for when this baby gets here. Hopefully not too soon. That'll be disastrous. No, I'm not ready yet. Did you see my actual brain like freaking out? Yeah, like no, not yet. Okay. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. You may have seen I've been doing a bit of freezer meal prep for when this baby gets here, and my favorite thing to have in the freezer is focaccia. It goes so well with everything. It's really easy to freeze and reheat. We made a massive batch of meatballs last week, and I'm gonna stuff it with focaccia. One baby in this hand, focaccia sandwich in this hand. It's gonna be perfect. I'm gonna show you how to make a really, really big batch. We have made focaccia on my channel before, but this is like a extra big batch that's perfect for going in the freezer. So let's go. The great thing about focaccia dough is that it's so easy to make. We're literally gonna mix the ingredients together and whack it in the fridge overnight and come back tomorrow and bake it. Now, this is gonna be a double batch of my regular focaccia recipe that I use all the time, but when you double a batch of dough, the yeast kind of acts differently, so you don't double the yeast. So I'm still gonna stick with 1 teaspoon of yeast and 1 teaspoon of sugar, but just double all the rest of the ingredients. So I'm gonna put my yeast into my bowl, along with the sugar, and the sugar acts as food for the yeast. And then I'm gonna weigh in 800 mils of warm water. So I boiled this kettle about 2 hours ago and it's still nice and warm. Right, we're just gonna give this a little mix with a fork. And then we'll just leave this for about 5 to 10 minutes until it starts to get a little bit foamy and bubbly on the top. The yeast has just started to get nice and foamy on the top. It won't foam up as much as when we've done a smaller batch because there's less water in there. So this has got a little bit longer to get up to the top, but this looks perfect. I can see that it's starting to come to life. Next, we're gonna add in 2 teaspoons of salt and then 1 kilo of plain flour. And I actually just use regular cheap flour from the supermarket. I make so much of this. I go through so much flour, that we just use that. And we'll just use a fork or a spoon just to bring that flour and water mixture together. We just want to mix it until it's just incorporated. Perfect. Right, we'll take this fork out. This is a super sticky dough, so don't freak out if you're a bit worried that it's a bit sticky. That's exactly what you want. Now we're gonna let this sit for about 10 to 15 minutes to give that gluten some time to relax before we mix in the oil. So I'm just gonna pop a tea towel on top, grab a cup of tea, and we'll see you in 15. Our dough has had 15 minutes to relax. The cool thing about focaccia dough is when you let it relax a little bit, it gets really nice and stringy. You'll see in a second. Now it's time to incorporate some oil. I never really measure my oil when I add it into focaccia dough, but you want about 4 tablespoons of really good quality olive oil. Oh, yeah. That'll do. And then I'm gonna use my hands to almost press the oil into the dough. So we're not kneading it, we're almost just folding the dough. So dab your fingers a little bit first, and then we're just gonna pull up and kind of flop it in on itself. And we only wanna do this until that oil is just incorporated. It's so lovely and soft. Right, that oil is nearly in. What I'm gonna try and do is shape it into a bit of a ball just because I like to and it feels nice in the fridge. So you just kind of tuck the bottom underneath. You'll only be able to do this if your hands are quite oily. It's not a major. And then we'll pop this back into the bowl. We're gonna glad wrap it nice and tight. I might have to do a bit of a double layer because I've got such a big bowl. Now you want to make sure it's really tight. We don't want any air to go in here because it's going to form a crust on the edge of the dough. Then our dough is going to go in the fridge overnight, so we'll see you tomorrow. Good morning or good lunchtime the next day. My dough is looking stunning. I think focaccia dough is just the most beautiful thing in the whole entire world. Now we're gonna get this into a tray and get it proving for 2 hours before we bake it. It looks lovely. The key to handling focaccia dough is always having oil on your hands. So I'm gonna really generously oil my tray and my hands, so this is really easy to handle. We have nice greasy fingers. I always just grease the fingers because you really want to just use your fingertips. Then what I'm going to do is kind of like push my fingers around the outside just to loosen off the edge and then pull the dough, and we're going to reshape it into a nice little ball. Oh yeah. So we do want to knock all that air out at this point because we're going to let it prove again. And if you've got nice greasy fingers, it should be really easy to press into a ball. Oh, I just love how smooth and shiny it is on the top. I'm just gonna tuck the bottom under a little bit. Then we're gonna pop this into the oil and kind of coat it in the oil. So we'll just give it a little flip. Whoops. Flip, and then just spread that oil around. Oop. Now you'll notice I put baking paper down under this focaccia today, and normally when I'm baking focaccia fresh, I don't put baking paper down, but because this is going into the freezer and I'm gonna reheat all my focaccia in the oven when I go to eat it, it's gonna help crisp up the bottom. So I'm doing it on baking paper here so that when I reheat it, it gets a really nice crispy bottom at the second stage. And then we're just gonna use our fingers to kind of push the dough into the direction of the tray. It doesn't need to reach fully, it just helps it rise into the edges. You can be quite firm. We want to kind of guide it into the direction that we want it to rise in, especially this middle part. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to wrap this tray nice and tightly. I might have to go for 2 lots of glad wrap on this. If you don't have a really big tray like this too, you can just make 2 smaller ones as well. Then we're gonna pop this somewhere nice and warm for about 2 hours to let it prove. You want it to come to room temperature, so that's kind of a good guide. If you live in a really hot climate, that might happen a bit faster. If you live in a cold climate, it might take a little bit longer. So give the dough a little feel. If it's at room temperature, it's really nice and big, then it's ready. Whoa, my focaccia is super proved. It's really bubbly. Let's open it up. Now, it might have stuck to your glad wrap a little bit. That's all right, just gently peel it off. Oh my goodness. It's gonna be so bubbly. That's the best part. Okay, the first thing we wanna do is kind of pull the corners or pull the dough into the corners just so it's kind of evenly spread. I'm gonna press my fingers down the middle just to make it nice and even and level. So I'll just start by pulling it a bit into that corner. It's actually risen really well into the corners. And we'll go down to these ones down here. Just give them a little pull into the corners. And then always grease your hands before you work with your focaccia. So I'm just gonna put a bit on my fingertips. Oh yeah, and then we're just gonna press into the dough. And while we're doing this, we can kind of make sure it's evenly spread out. So we don't want thin bits around the edges. We want it to be nice and level. Perfect. Now you could totally just bake a big tray of focaccia like this, give it a little extra drizzle of oil and then cut it up when it comes out the oven. But I like to portion it first so it kind of creates like little rolls that have their own little crust. So to do that, I'm gonna use my bench scraper. You could also use a knife. The first thing I'm gonna do is measure out where I want them. So I'm gonna go for 12 portions. So I'm just basically gonna gently down the middle, just mark out with a little press the halfway point. And then I'm gonna split these into 3. So I kind of just use my bench scraper to measure. Hopefully it's about even. Now you could either cut them down diagonally and make triangle shape kind of rolls, or you could go rectangles down the middle. I'm gonna go down the middle and do some rectangles. That way they're like kind of sandwich loaves or focaccia loaves that you could use for a sandwich or stuff or just slice in any way you like. Then, perfect. I'm gonna drizzle down those lines that I just created with some oil. So having one like this is really handy. You just put your thumb over to stop it coming out too much. So we're gonna go right around the edges. Whoop. Then down all those lines you just marked out. Don't worry if it's not perfectly down the lines. Just want to do your best. Perfect. Then we're going to go back with our bench scraper and push right down to the bottom. The reason we put some oil on is so when we push down, the oil is going to kind of go down the cracks as well, and that's going to create like a little crust on both sides. So just firmly push down right to the bottom. And then move along to the next one. Focaccia is such like an olive oily bread, and it's flippin' delicious. Okay, the last thing is to go around the edges as well. So cut down the sides of the dough just to help that oil down the side create a nice crust. Perfect, right, this is ready to go into the oven. I'm gonna bake it for about 20 minutes. Because I've got such a big tray, I'm gonna turn it halfway through just to get a nice even bake. We're looking for a really, really lovely, crunchy, golden crust on the top. Yum, I love the smell of focaccia. So I just let this cool for about 15 minutes in the tray, but I'm gonna take them out of the tray now so they can cool really well, especially because there's baking paper on the bottom. We don't want it to cool and sweat on the bottom and get really soggy. So our handy bench scraper is gonna come in really handy here again, and we're just gonna cut down all those lines that we created before, which should be nice and easy. And then we'll just lift out each of those bits of focaccia one at a time, and I'll just pop them onto my cooling rack. Look how bubbly they are too. They're gonna be amazing. I'm gonna try so hard not to eat one now because they look amazing. I love having these little focaccia rectangles in the freezer. They are so handy for so many different things. You can fill them with meatballs. You can make like a salami and brie sandwich, which is the thing I am the most excited for once this baby comes out. If you know, you can't eat salami and cheese when you're pregnant. You could have them with like a stew. They're perfect for mopping up all the sauce. I might need to make another tray. Right, we're gonna leave these to completely cool, then we'll come back and get them in the freezer. The very final job to do is get these into the freezer. Now you can store them however you like in a Tupperware container. I'm gonna do them in Ziploc bags because I have a little freezer and I wanna save as much room as I can. So I'm gonna try and squeeze 6 in each. Make sure they're fully cooled. These are completely cooled down, which is perfect. So we'll just pop them all in. Then if you can manage to keep them flat, this is gonna slot in the freezer so nice and easily. So glad 6 fit in the bag. Oh yeah, these are ready to go into the freezer. Now when you do go to reheat these, I always like to reheat them in the oven so they get really nice and crispy, especially if you put them low down in the oven and they get really crispy bottoms. It is best if you let them defrost first. You don't have to, you can cook them straight from frozen, but they turn out better if you let them defrost first. Whack them in the oven, whatever temperature you've got it, if you've already got something in there, or around 200 degrees is great. I hope you have a go at making some frozen focaccia. We'll see you next time, bye!